Story time about how I faked a pregnancy to get my boyfriend to marry me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Okay, this is super embarrassing and I did get in trouble for this, so strap in. He's now my ex because of course he dumped my ass. He and I met in college and we were totally in love. Like, we spent every single day together and we moved in together really fast. We even stopped going to parties just to be together. About 3 years into the relationship, I told him that I definitely wanted to get married. He told me that he just wasn't ready. Then everything got really bad. He became really cold towards me. When I confronted him about it, he was honest and he told me that he just didn't love me anymore. Then he moved out and literally cut me out of his life. Even his parents told me to leave him alone. So there's a pregnant girl working at the coffee shop I usually go to. I paid her $600 to pee on a pregnancy stick. I knew this was the only way I was going to get him to marry me. I show up to my boyfriend's house, but guess who's there? He's with his ex-girlfriend sitting on the couch watching a movie. That's when I willed myself to cry and I show him the pregnancy test. Part 2 is up. So I show my ex the fake pregnancy test so that he can marry me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Mind you, his ex is sitting on the couch waiting for him to come back so that they can finish watching their stupid movie. And when he saw that the test was positive, he started to cry. I told him that we had to talk and he told his ex to leave. Then he tells his parents to come into the room and his mom also started to cry when she saw the pregnancy test. I couldn't really tell if they were happy tears or if they were like, oh no tears. That's when I told him that I fully expected him to ask me to marry him. I even told him that I was 2 months along so we could start planning the wedding. That's when he told his parents that I was right. Then he asked me to marry him. I knew that I got what I wanted, but I had no idea how I was going to fake this pregnancy. A few days later, he moved back into our apartment. He started painting the guest room so that it could be the nursery. But here's the worst part. A month later, I was still not able to get pregnant. I didn't know what to do, so I started eating a lot of food to fake the pregnancy bump. I would eat McDonald's for breakfast and Taco Bell for dinner. Part 3 is up. In order to fake the pregnancy, I had to gain weight. So I started eating tons of food. I would have pizza every other day. I ate 2 pints of ice cream a day. And every time I passed by a fast food place, I would pick up something to eat. I was gaining a little bit of weight, so people believed me when I said I was pregnant. Finally, the wedding came around. I was so relieved once we were married because I knew I had to eventually go to the doctor. And I had decided that once the doctor said that I wasn't pregnant, I would put on a show and pretend that I just lost the baby. Well, when it finally happened, my husband straight up asked me if I made it all up. And I told him yes. It literally took him 1 hour to move out of the apartment. He went straight to get a restraining order, and my parents sent me to a psychiatrist. But you see, we're still married. He hasn't filed for divorce, so I think I should reach out to him. I know he and I will end up together. What do you guys think? Story time about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My husband actually cheated on his wife with me. I started working at his company when I was 18. We started an affair and I knew it was wrong, but at the time I was very broke. He offered me a wealthy lifestyle and believe it or not, we fell in love. So when he and I got married, I was still 18. He was much older than me. He was 42. Everyone in town, of course, started hating me because I broke up the family. His wife couldn't even see my face. My husband already had 2 kids when we got married. One was 12, one was 15. So they were much closer in age to me than he was. The kids and I got along super well. I was their cool stepmom and we had a lot of fun. When I turned 20, the oldest boy came to live with us. And I think you already know what happens. My husband was always traveling for work. That means my stepson and I would be home alone most of the time. One night we decided to watch a movie and before I knew it, we were making out on the couch. From then, we basically started an affair behind my husband's back. Part 2 is up. Part 2 about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said, my husband was always traveling for work. So my stepson and I would be alone in the house a lot. One night we were watching a movie and it just happened. After that, we couldn't get enough of each other. He even started skipping class so that he could spend more time with me. We basically turned into boyfriend and girlfriend when my husband wasn't there. When my husband would come home from his work trips, we would pretend like everything was normal. One day after my husband got back from one of his work trips, he found one of his son's socks in our bed. He asked me how it got there, but I told him it probably got stuck in there while I was washing the sheets. A few months passed by and my stepson and I are still hooking up. This is when I realized that I hadn't gotten my period in a few months. My period was always irregular, so I didn't think anything of it. My stepson went to the pharmacy to get me a pregnancy test. It came out positive. But the big problem is that my husband can't have children anymore. How was I going to explain this to my husband when he couldn't have kids? Part 3 is up. Part 3 about how I got caught hooking up with my stepson. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My stepson and I take the pregnancy test and it turns out it was positive. Well, I told my stepson that his dad wasn't able to have kids anymore. That's when he really flipped out. Then he tells me we should just tell his dad the truth. I told him let's not do anything until we actually confirm that I'm pregnant. We go to the doctor the next day and it turns out I'm not pregnant. But this made me realize that we needed to end the affair. Once we got home, I told him we needed to break things off. He begged me not to, to, and we went to his bedroom. Not even 2 minutes later, his mother walks in. She catches us on his bed. She nearly has a heart attack, calls his dad and tells him everything. She took him out of the house and told me never to see him again. When my husband came back from his trip, he made me promise not to see my stepson again. I told him we should get a divorce, but he said no. Then he confessed to me that he's been having an affair too. Now he doesn't even let me leave the house anymore. I want a divorce. What should I do? Story time about how I caught my husband with his best friend in bed. Who, by the way, is a guy. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I knew that my husband was bi before we got married and it never bothered me. In fact, that's how we met. A few years ago, I was dating this guy, and we had an open relationship, and he would tell me about this other guy that he was hooking up with. Well, he introduced me to his male friend, and we actually ended up hooking up. A few months later, we became boyfriend and girlfriend, and a few years later, we got married. So I always knew my husband was bi. Here's when his best friend comes into the picture. Let's call him Kenny. Kenny's been best friends with my husband for over 7 years. They've known each other longer than I've known my husband. But get this, Kenny is also married. Kenny would sometimes sleep over our house when it was really late. A few weeks ago, he slept over. I went to bed, but at 4 in the morning, I wake up and my husband is not in bed. So I go looking for him and I hear a noise coming from the guest bedroom. I walk in and see that my husband is tied to the bed. Guess what they were doing? Part 2 is up. I see my husband is tied to the bed and his best friend Kenny is doing things to him. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I was so shocked I ran to the toilet and vomited. Kenny went straight to put on his clothes, but my husband was still tied to the damn bed. Before Kenny could start untying him, I straight up started punching my husband in the face, the chest, the neck. I felt uncontrollable rage for the first time. This whole time that I thought they were just best friends, my husband and his male best friend Kenny are hooking up behind my back. Here's when I really started to lose control. Kenny tried to pull me off of my husband, so I noticed that they had a bunch of candles lit. So I grabbed 2 candles and threw them straight at Kenny's head. One of them missed, but the other one got him. So Kenny grabbed his phone and started calling 911. Mind you, my husband is still tied to the bed at this point. Then I grabbed another candle and poured all the hot wax on top of my husband's you-know-what. Part 3 is up. My husband is tied to the bed, so I grabbed the candle and poured all the hot wax on his you-know-what. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Kenny has already called the police at this point and they are on their way. I'm still in blind rage and my husband is still tied to the bed. That's when Kenny grabs me by the hair, takes me to the bathroom and throws me into the tub. I landed on my arm and actually broke it. He goes to untie my husband and that's when the police knock on the door. Well, guess what? They arrested me for assaulting my husband. I sat in a jail cell for 6 hours before my husband came to bail me out. Of course, he apologized and said he would drop the charges. Apparently, Kenny asked his wife for a divorce and is demanding that my husband and I get divorced because he wants to be with my husband. My husband basically said that he doesn't know who to choose, me or him. I really do love my husband. What do I do? Story time about how my dad shot my abusive husband. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My husband and I met through some friends, but I never thought he was attractive or even interesting. But then I heard from other people that he would comment about how beautiful I was, and that's when he started asking me out. I kept saying no because I just didn't like him. But then he reached out to my cousin and asked her to convince me to go out with him. My cousin and I are super close and I always trusted her judgment. So I finally said yes to one date. I was in nursing school at the time, so I was really busy and actually really broke. So he paid for dinner and he even offered to help me pay my bills. I couldn't believe he was being so generous, but obviously at the time I didn't realize that he was just trying to control me. Here's where it gets really scary. 2 months later, he actually took me out on a date. And it was our wedding. That's right, he planned a whole wedding, got my parents' permission and everything. I show up to this date thinking we were gonna have dinner, but then he put me in a freaking wedding gown. I felt like I had no other choice, so I said yes. 2 weeks after we got married, he completely changed. He was totally abusive. He started brainwashing me to not even see my family. Part 2 is up. After my husband forced me into marrying him, he became a totally different person. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. He started brainwashing me into believing that I could never leave him, that no one could ever love me, and he even started convincing me that my family hated me. It was just his way to keep me away from them. But my entire family had enough, especially my dad. My dad was a cop and he had dealt with a lot of abusive husbands in the past. So one night my dad comes to our very big, very beautiful house and he asked my husband to let me go. That's when my husband grabs a bat from behind the door and starts swinging at my dad. My dad, being a cop, had his gun on him. He pulled it out and shot him in the you-know-what. That's when he looked at me and said that he would kill me if I left. Part 3 is up. My dad pulls his gun out and shoots my husband in the you-know-what. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My husband falls to the ground, looks at me and says that if I leave the house, he would kill me. But of course, I ran straight to my dad and we went home. My dad called an ambulance and they went to get my husband. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I never went to visit him once. I was so grateful to my dad for getting me out of that abusive relationship. But guess what? The abuse hasn't ended. My husband is suing me for abandonment. He's got his lawyers visiting me every single day, harassing me. I've noticed one man who keeps following me, and my car was broken into 2 nights ago. There's so much more. I think I'll have to make a follow-up story time. My dad is doing everything possible to get the divorce, and we're also trying to get a restraining order against my husband. I actually recently found pictures that I had taken of my bruises, so now I've got proof. Should I do a part 4?